Hey YouTube, welcome to another Escarlesco Cap video. Get ready, it's amazing. Once again, we have Magnus Carlsen in a final. Raphael, what are you talking about? The grand final of Title Tuesday that happened yesterday. This game is fresh out of the oven and this final was played between them. On one side, Magnus Carlsen, on the other, Hans Niemann, competing for the tournament title. But both players, of course, were live and streaming. Look at the images, Magnus Carlsen and Hans Niemann. Now the world was wondering, is it Niemann's turn to take down Magnus? Magnus was in top form, having just become the World Rapid and Blitz champion, but was he also the Title Tuesday champion? You're going to see everything in detail with the players' reactions right at the moment of resignation, and you'll understand everything. Now I'm warning you, hold on to your seat and get your popcorn ready. Let's get to the battle, because chess will always be now. And with the white pieces, Magnus Carlsen against Ransom, Rans Niemann. And Magnus started, of course, with a queen's pawn, positional player, Rans. He quickly goes into the Slav defense, the knights develop, and Magnus, known for playing fianchetto, prepares it here. Bishop to g2 is standard. Rans Niemann now plays bishop to g4, an ambitious move, aiming to play e6 at the right moment with the bishop. Outside of the pawn structure, Magnus moved the knight and now Rans. He accepts the gambit that white was offering. This reminds me of these lines here. When they take on c4 in the World Championship matches, back in Alekine's time, this was played a lot, a very common move. Here, the idea was to play a4 to delay b5 and capture the pawn at the right time. But Magnus says he can still develop the bishop to g2 as the pawn will fall eventually. Niemann plays knight to d7. Be careful, this may be a greedy move to keep the c4 pawn. Magnus noted it too. This won't work. Defend my king, nothing gets through. And of course, Niemann won't fall behind in development. He wants to bring out the bishop and also castle, keeping the position balanced and the time under control. And at this point, of course, Magnus wants to recover the pawn. He plays the move a4, already keeping ideas of b5 in mind. And he wants to take the c4 pawn. Niemann brings the bishop into the game. Notice that he's already preparing the idea of castling. And Magnus starts aiming the queen, looking at the c4 pawn. He wants to equalize material, making castling a natural move at this key moment. The position stays balanced, but not Niemann. He moves the queen to a5, keeping the king in the center for one more move. Just one more play. Raphael, that's not a problem, because Magnus here plays the move knight to a2. Notice that Magnus's idea is still to recover the pawn. He's also threatening, of course, to break up the pair of bishops. Niemann said, I'm going to defend this little bishop. And the world was waiting for Magnus to take back the pawn on c4, but not Magnus. Here, this position is balanced. If you put it into the engines, taking on c4. It's an impossible move, yet Magnus plays one that introduces a strategic dynamic to the game. Here he chooses to gain a tempo of development against the queen, even while being a pawn down. Notice that here, Niemann plays the move he has to play. The greedy move, of course, which is queen to a6. He defends the queen and says, well, didn't you take on c4? I'm going to keep my extra pawn. And at this moment, Magnus needs an idea that justifies the fact that he's a pawn down. And here comes Magnus's move. Knight to b4, attacking the queen. If the queen retreats awkwardly, Magnus can still regain the pawn on c4. And Niemann said, well, I'm going to stay greedy. And Niemann took here on b4, and now the American continues with the extra pawn. Now, Raphael, what is the strategic counterpoint that Magnus brings? By being a pawn down against Hans, he loses the right to castle. So as long as that bishop is watching the f8 square, Niemann's king is stuck in the center, and the rook on h8 won't be able to play. Magnus adds another idea. He prepares rook to c1 and recovers the pawn while Niemann's king remains in the center. Hans notices this and plays bishop to f5, refusing to allow it. The ideas here are interesting. Now Hans wants to avoid Magnus doubling up and taking the pawn. So, Magnus moves the queen to stabilize, but now he loses the doubled pieces. Raphael, why did Magnus play queen to c3 to threaten the c4 pawn? Why isn't that good? Because then knight goes to d5 and your key bishop is lost, right? If you move that queen, I can take here and eventually queen to b6 happens and the position is fine. So what did Magnus suggest? Queen to c1. Do you keep your king in the center? That's uncomfortable. Niemann plays bishop to e4, introducing an interesting strategic idea. He has an extra pawn, and if you move the knight, he'll try to trade more pieces. More trades bring him closer to an endgame with that extra pawn. Notice that Magnus is going to let that happen, but on his own terms. So he sets up the idea of knight to d2, and when you trade, Look at the rook on e1, already preparing the idea of e4. Magnus takes control of the center, and Niemann still has his king in the center. Niemann plays h6 to control the square, saying he can return the bishop if needed. Magnus replies, "If you want to trade, go ahead." Niemann traded on the light square, he traded. Now the whole point is that the pawn is falling, and Magnus also has the idea of playing the move e4. And at this moment, Niemann makes it clear how uncomfortable he is about not being able to castle the rook. It doesn't come into play. This is a terrible drama. And Niemann said, "Calm down, take your pawn back, return the pawn, it's a white flag, I ask for peace. Let's calm this thing down." Now, Magnus, of course, he's not going to take with the bishop. Giving up that powerful bishop on this diagonal, he takes with the pawn. The material is the same. Niemann takes advantage, of course. He has an idea, he always does. He brings the queen back into the game with a check. After Region, the world expected Niemann to recover and keep his extra pawn. But at this moment, he plays a knight move that you'll understand. Why, Raphael? Why didn't he take it? Because he can't play that move, because if he takes here, look what happens. Magnus takes on c4, the material would stay the same here. But Magnus has the initiative. He's threatening that knight. And when you defend the knight, Magnus's idea is that Niemann would follow. Without castling, you can trade here, but watch for the knight entering d6. The king's in the center and the rook can't move. The same strategic theme would be happening now with the same amount of material, so that's not something Hans wants. Well, he played knight to d5. The American's idea is to eliminate this bishop. But it's incredible. Until now, Magnus was down a pawn, and at this moment, Magnus ends up with an extra pawn. It seems almost magical, but Magnus has an extra pawn. Notice Niema's king is still in the center. How this happened is unknown. Niema has now, of course, eliminated that bishop that was bothering him the whole game, and after taking it back, Niema, he recovers material, but Raphael isn't equalized since Magnus is capturing on b7. The most important question here is why didn't Niema capture with the knight to actually equalize the material? Again, you can't always do what you want. Sometimes, here, you take the rook on c1, threaten to capture your knight. And when you defend with the most natural move, you get queen to c3. I play on g7, see the king's central problem, and b4 threat, it's lost. The game is over. I try to move the knight, but it's pinned and can't move. So Niema must capture with the pawn, and for now, material is equal. But Magnus says, "No, I have an extra pawn. It's incredible." The whole game with the pawn, at least at this moment, he's up a pawn. And again, you can't castle because otherwise you'll hang that knight. Of course, Niema played the move everyone was waiting for, which is rook to b8. He attacks the queen, and he's saying that he'll take on b2 at the right moment. But Magnus defended b2 with the move queen to b4. Raphael, because this move doesn't defend b2, how can this be a defense? Magnus defended with the tactic, that's why Niema castled, which he had been aiming for a long time. In the game, Raphael, why can't he take here? Because Magnus defended with the move to b4, it's incredible, because here you get hit by this move. Rook from a to c1 attacks the queen, threatens the rook on c8. The worst part is, moving the queen to b6 or a5 both get you forked. And even queen to b4, which seems best, has issues. When the king moves, I check, trade queens, and after the recapture, you lose an entire rook. So, notice that Hans Niema, he can't take this pawn. Queen e4 defended Niema. Here, he castles. Now there are no more back rank threats. He threatens to take this pawn, and here Magnus defends, gaining another tempo on the queen. The queen is under threat, so Niema moves her to a5 now. He threatens both the knight and the pawn. And again, Magnus defended with tactics. He played the queen move to e3, exclaiming, there's no doubt about it. He defended the b2 pawn again. Raphael, how is that a defense? Niema played knight to f6, Raphael. Hold on. This tactical theme, it's always happening. It's unbelievable that a human being can play at this level. But Magnus is a MA. Magnus defends the b2 pawn more concretely by playing knight to c4 attacking a. Niemann needs to create dynamics and take risks. Instead of playing queen to a6, he stays defensive, but eventually takes a risk with queen to b4. saying you can take the a7 pawn because then comes rook to c8, and one day, when the knight moves, I'll recover. On b2, Magnus accepted. He took on a7, and for the moment, Magnus is 2 pawns up. It's a brutal strategic turnaround. In the game, Niemann makes his move, which is to move this knight. Well, he's going to prepare to get the queen out of here. Then he takes the knight. If you move the knight, he takes here, then takes on b2. You can see there's a certain dynamic. But Magnus keeps causing issues, saying no, and plays knight to e5. Check it out. A new way to defend the b2 pawn. If you capture b2, f7 falls, letting me trade a pair of rooks, and e6 could also fall. At some point, Niemann said none of that. I'll trade a pair of rooks here now and defend f7 with the move rook to b7. Notice that when you defend the queen at the end, the b2 pawn falls, and both the rook and knight are attacked. Did Magnus make a mistake? It's incredible, but Magnus plays the best move for him. In this position, he plays check. When the king moves to the only square available here, Magnus defends the b2 pawn again with a dynamic move, queen to a8. Because if you take on b2, you get checkmated. Look at the knight taking away the king's escape square. Once again, Niemann can't take this pawn and he has to defend. He plays g5 now. Yes, he threatened, because the checkmate is no longer possible. He gives the king breathing space. The knight controls g8, b2 is threatened. But Magnus saves it by playing knight to d3, impressively holding both extra pawns. A human being shouldn't be able to do something like this. He's always thinking ahead. The threatened queen moves to b3 as Magnus starts to recover, making things clear. He'll play the endgame with 2 extra passed pawns on the queen's side and consolidate his advantage. King g7. Niemann runs out of ideas and Magnus pushes the extra pawns. Rook b5. The pawn keeps advancing. Niemann says this pawn might get there, and Magnus plays. Queen b7, saying, let's trade c koi because I'm threatening your queen. Hans, he traded the queens. Magnus threatens promotion, but here Niemann holds everything by a thread. Raphael, is Magnus going to lose this advantage? And Magnus drops the bomb. Knight to c5, he holds that pawn, and the problem again, this move also defends the b2 pawn. It's unbelievable. But here Hans played knight to d5. Why? If he takes here and gives up a tempo to capture the pawn, he faces rook to a1, rook to a8, and Magnus promotes. There's no time to defend against that. Niemann saw that, and he starts bringing the knight to hold b8 before it's too late. Magnus. When he plays rook to a1, he still sacrifices the b2 pawn. If you take it, you lose the promotion defense. If you take the knight, Magnus still promotes. Knight on e7 is falling, preparing knight to c6, and now Magnus moves the rook to the 8th rank, threatening promotion. Niemann barely defends with knight to c6, and at this point, Magnus, you couldn't take here. But the last move in the position, rook to c8, is incredible. But here, Niemann has no way to defend this position anymore. Niemann resigned here. Yeah, once again, it's an impressive game showing the calculation ability that Magnus has. And notice that here, it looks like you're losing. You can take on b2, you can also take the knight here, but nothing works. Because, for example, if you take the knight, the idea is not to take here, because if you take here, Niemann can come back and stop the promotion. Magnus's idea would be to promote. After this exchange, he gains an extra piece and pawn, leading to a 1 endgame. Watch him resign. Everything happened quickly in this final stage. When Magnus played rook a1, setting up rook a8, Niemann, focused and calculating, made the strong move, knight e7 to knight c6. And here, Niemann starts to realize that he's completely lost. There's nothing else he can do. And notice that he hits the table, bangs his fist on the table, all that, and then he ends up resigning. Magnus Carlsen beats Niemann and becomes the champion of Title Tuesday. It's clear how impressive his accuracy is. Once again, Magnus playing like a machine, surprising absolutely no one. Look at those 2 brilliant moves. Rook to a1 leaving the knight, and rook to a8 preparing for coronation. Everything is precise now. Results are in. Magnus wins Title Tuesday with 9.5 points, taking first on tiebreaks. There's Keimer and Duda, and in positions 8 and 9, both Niemann and Hans Niemann. The chess world keeps an eye on everything that's happening. If you like the news, the summary, and the analysis, don't forget to like and see you in the next videos.